Okay, I left off here in the last video, kind of cut off. So this is the restored view of an Egyptian mastaba tomb. So it's, like I said earlier, it's kind of a structure with sloping slides made out of mud brick over the top of an underground burial chamber. And they think that this developed from the earlier earthen burial mounds. Typically they just have one burial, but sometimes a mastaba would hold more than one burial. Sometimes they'd have whole families buried underneath one mastaba. So they typically had a chapel, and they typically featured a false door for the Ka, or the Ka is the life force. And the life force would escape through that false door and then join the works of the living through this false door. So they always typically had that false door. And so here's the burial chamber, and then the false door is pictured here. This is the chapel, and then this is the serdab, where they would typically keep a statue of the deceased. So this is one of the earliest forms of tomb in ancient Egyptian culture in the Predynastic period. So this is kind of the next step up from that mastaba. This is the stepped pyramid of Djoser from Saqqara in Egypt. It's from the 3rd dynasty, 2630 through 2611 BCE. Imhotep is the architect that worked on this piece. And this could be found, like I said, in Memphis, which is the ancient necropolis or the city of the dead for the city of Memphis. So within certain cities, they would have a city of the dead kind of walled off within the city called a necropolis, basically, necropolis. So Memphis was Egypt's capital at the time. And this is a step pyramid, and like I said, Imhotep made it, and he is definitely the first ever mentioned artist that has been recorded in written form. So that's kind of cool. And this is definitely one of the oldest stone structures in Egypt, and it is considered the first stone pyramid. And they think it was begun as a large mastaba and then added on to where it was basically twice its original size. And it is aligned with the cardinal directions. And it's basically a series of mastabas like stacked on top of each other, I would say. Each smaller than the next, obviously. But it's not like a temple. It's not like a ziggurat in Mesopotamian architecture. It's actually a tomb. So there's a difference there between Mesopotamia and Egypt. This is a tomb, not a temple. Mesopotamian ziggurats are temples. And so the purpose of this step pyramid is to be a tomb to the mummified king, and also to symbolize his godlike power to those people that viewed it. And it would also serve as the home to the Ka, or spirit of the dead king, in his afterlife. And Imhotep, they think the artist, the architect, may have conceived the step pyramid as a stairway to the sun, because the Egyptians did worship the sun. That is probably maybe where he got the concept for this. So I'll show you the Mortuary Precinct at Djoser, which is called a necropolis, which is, the city of the dead, basically, within a city, within the city of Memphis, actually, in this case. And it's typically walled off from the rest of the city of, in this case, Memphis, to kind of protect the contents within. Because there's some pretty important things inside of here, right? Like probably lots of riches and jewels and different things that are worth a lot of money. So they're walling it off to keep people out for the most part. So this is the Mortuary Precinct where you can find that step pyramid of Djoser. And it's located at the center of this precinct. And there also are some other small courtyards that you can see, and some other small buildings that are basically, most of them are dummy buildings full of rubble. So that's kind of to throw off grave robbers. So let's look at the columnar entrance to the corridor of the Mortuary Precinct at Djoser. So this is the entrance to the mortuary precinct, and you can see that these are what appear to be columns. We've seen these a lot in our own architecture of the modern day, but this is actually the first instance that we've ever found of the use of columns. And the interesting thing about these columns is that they are actually supposed to be representations of bundles of papyrus. So we talked about papyrus. It was a plant that grew wild in Egypt along the banks of the Nile River. It grew very tall, and the Egyptians would cut it to make structures with. So they made temporary structures out of papyrus, different kinds of housing that they would make, and they would bundle the papyrus and create, houses with that. And so that's where this form came from, was from bundled papyrus. But they're just, instead of doing it with papyrus, they're doing it in stone. So that's kind of where that came from. And it's really interesting because the Greeks and the Romans take this same form and they use it too. So the original form comes from a bundle of papyrus. So it's just imitating features from temporary structures in stone, and we can see that instance, an example of that here. Okay, we'll keep looking at the mortuary. So here's a different area of the mortuary precinct of Djoser in Saqqara, Egypt. It's the detail of the facade of the North Palace, and we can see that these columns look a little bit different. They are a little bit more stylized. They have a fluted shaped capital. The capital is the top part of a column that is supposed to represent the flowering papyrus stalks. So they're not freestanding columns, they're engaged columns, which means that they're actually attached to a wall. So they're not freestanding, they're engaged. So not only are these engaged, but this example as well is engaged because they are part of a wall. If it was completely in the round where you could walk all the way around it, that would be freestanding. But these are engaged columns. So that's kind of important. And like I said, these are some of the instances of the earliest appearance of columns in architecture. And like I said, down the road, the Greeks borrow from this and the Romans borrow the column. So next up we have the Old Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom is the first of three main kingdoms. So Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms are all kind of within the timeline of ancient Egypt. The Old Kingdom amassed a lot of wealth and then built some of the most famous monumental structures ever built. So the 4th dynasty pyramids, called the Great Pyramids of Giza, are considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the world, and I'd be very surprised if you guys haven't heard of the Great Pyramids at Giza, Egypt. So from the bottom, the Pyramid of Menkaure is down here, Khafre's pyramid is here, and then Khufu is here. So we have 3 different god kings that these were made for. And they were constructed over the course of 75 years. And they serve as tombs to these 4th dynasty's kings. And they kind of represent that final stage of architectural evolution that started with the mastaba and then went into the stepped pyramid. And then now we have the full-fledged form here of the pyramid. But you shouldn't think of it as simply a refined version of the step pyramid. The pyramidal shape probably reflects the influence of the powerful cult of Re, whose emblem is the pyramidal stone, which is also called a benben. And it is thought that before the beginning of time, there was a great pool of limitless water that existed alone in the darkness. And at the moment of creation, a mound rose out of the waters, just as a muddy mound might, emerge from the Nile after the floods recede. And on this mound, the sun god Re appeared and brought light to the world. So that's what they believed. That's what the Egyptians believed. This original mound is represented as a pyramidal-shaped stone, and this is where we get the shape for these monuments. Basically comes from that creation story where, a mound rose out of a great lake and that was the moment of creation. And so basically the pyramids are symbols of the sun. The sun's rays are thought of as kind of the ladder that the god kings used to ascend to the heavens. And the pyramids were where the Egyptian kings were reborn in the afterlife, just as the sun is reborn each day at dawn. So there's a lot of symbolism there, tying into their creation story, tying into the sun. So it's really interesting to think about that. So this is a section of the Great Pyramid at Egypt. And we can see this one is for Khufu. And you can see there's, silhouette. So they were originally faced with white limestone, so they really shone in the sun. The sun would really reflect off of these. Thieves' tunnels, entrance, which is number 3, which is right here. Grand gallery, the king's chamber, which is right here. They call this the queen chamber. So you can take a look at this and see, they're not quite sure what these are. They think they're air shafts. Might be also places for the Ka to enter into the world, potentially, but they're not quite sure. So the 4 sides of the pyramids are aligned to the cardinal points. And the mortuary temples of each pyramid are located on the east side of each pyramid, facing the sun. So there's a mortuary temple on the east side of each of these. So they're just a piece of a larger funerary complex that existed, which included the pyramid itself, but on the east side was a mortuary temple where priests typically would make offerings to the deceased. And then a roofed causeway would come from each of these and then lead into a valley temple. So basically the pyramid served as a king's tomb and also the palace for him, a palace for him in his afterlife, basically. So this is the Great Sphinx. A lot of you probably have seen this. This is kind of really near, very close to the pyramids of Giza. And it's carved out of the Giza stone quarry. And it's a very colossal size. It's the body of a lion, which symbolizes strength in Egypt, and the head of a human king. So that symbolizes human intelligence. So we kind of have a creature, a composite creature here, half human, half lion, that is smart and strong. And it's probably the representation of Khafre. It originally had a king's ceremonial beard, which typically is kind of a longer piece that comes off of the face. But these features were lost in time. And it actually used to have a cobra at the top, too, of this headdress, but that also was lost